Welcome, everyone. Dr. Garcia. Listen, I'm clicking way too many buttons here. I've got the title page. We've got music going on. Our guest is giving me a hard time about talking. So he's not even on the show yet and already giving me a hard time about yippity yapping. Welcome, everyone, to Sports Doc Talk. I'm Will Sanchez along with Dr. Garcia. Dr. Garcia, how are you, buddy?
I'm awesome. I'm excited for this one. I also love that our guest is giving you trouble already. This is going to be good.
You just like
I'm
busting my
excited.
chops.
I'm excited. Well, you know what? Everyone knows we got our. This is the new product we're going to be talking about. I got my new background. You never know what's going to be, so it changes every show. But we're really excited for this. I think this is something that patients don't know about. I constantly get questions, and it's actually not as much in the office because they already know what they want. But the patients that I have, like on the street, they're like, "Hey, you're orthopedic surgeon." And I'm like, "Yeah." They're like, "It'd be really cool if we could like regrow cartilage. Don't you think that'd be really cool?" And I'm like, "We actually can." And they have they're just totally blown away. So, from a layman terms, this is one of the most common questions that I get when they find out that I do sports surgery. So I thought it was kind of good for the people out there to see what's out there. What's one of the sort of hottest, most talked about products, and learn about this. And obviously, we got super lucky because the CEO wanted to come on. Nick, and I'll be really excited to talk to him. So,
yeah, we're going to get into that in a second. For me, when I saw the product and I saw you posting videos on LinkedIn, and I was like, oh, this is pretty cool stuff, and it's just, once again, we're always talking about innovation. We're talking about the future. We're talking about, more importantly, what these products do for the patient, right? Because obviously you have, your colleagues, and then more importantly, it's the patients and how they benefit from this. So we're really excited about doing that. But first, what we're really excited about? We're really excited about the Recovery Shop. Why? Because we got a lot of love for the Recovery Shop because they help you, the patient, just as we were discussing. Dr. Garcia, talk a little bit more about the Recovery Shop.
So big thanks to our sponsors. I mean, it's pretty much every day that I hear patients post-surgical say how much they're happy about, how happy they are about this. The ability to get all these aftermarket things that they want. Patients coming in, especially in Seattle, asking for I want everything, right? I want to have the best machines. I want to have the best recovery. I want nutrition. It's all there for the patients. It's a one-stop shop. It really allows them to have the sort of extra stuff. And we're going to talk about cutting edge stuff today. They get to offer that stuff from the rehab standpoint. So it's been great. Again, any doctor, surgeon interested in using it for their patients, let us know, and or just touch base with Mike because it's easier that way. So thanks again, guys.
All right, man. Let's bring on our guests. Nick Colangelo, welcome to the show. Thank you for taking some time and being here. You have an awesome step and repeat behind you. I mean, that is professional. Dr. Garcia, I think I may need one of these cool step and repeats.
I know, we're going to have to do that. We talked about hats and things like that, but Nick, I think we have had a lot of guests on here, but I think you're the most professional looking.
Well, I'm going to guess that's a good thing, and we'll
take care of you.
We'll take care of you, Will. We'll get you something for your background.
All right. Let's make sure first off, I'm sorry. I'm taking over again. I apologize here. You're from Pennsylvania, right? Is that where you were originally from? Are you originally from Pennsylvania or Indiana? Tell us a little bit about your background because, I know you're on the East Coast, so we want to share some of that before we get into everything else that you do here.
Yeah, so it's upstate New York. So that's where I am from. And, actually, just by way of background, so lawyer by training. And I actually started my career in industry about 30 years ago when I joined Eli Lilly. And, I was really fortunate to, start there as a tax lawyer, but, after a few years to actually be moved over to the business side, which doesn't happen very often. Ultimately became kind of the director of strategy and business development for Lilly's diabetes and obesity product group. And, it was a great foundational experience for me because the product group president at the time was more of a commercial guy. And he said, if you're coming over here to work for me, you're going out in the field to learn our customers. And so I was a sales rep for a little while. Selling, Prozac and Lilly's insulin products, which was great. And then, really just kind of being in the middle of the whole product development, commercialization, and so on of a pretty important product group for Lilly was just a great experience. And ultimately ran Lilly's venture funds for a while. So, Over the course of my career, kind of just had a lot of business development experience, acquiring, developing, and commercializing products, and joined what was the predecessor company of Vericel about 12 years ago now. So it's been quite a bit of time, but it's been a great experience, as I'm sure we'll talk about.
Yeah. So I think for the viewers too to know, obviously Vericel is the major company, right? And then we hear this word MACI, right? So can you explain the difference in the two? Because everyone hears me, you say the word MACI, they look at you, they see CEO of Vericel, and they see Vericel in the background. So it'd be good for us to kind of understand that better.
Yeah, so Vericel Corporation is the company that developed and commercializes MACI. So, we acquired MACI back in 2014. So the company that I joined was actually called Astrum Biosciences, and it was a company that was in the cell therapy space, conducting clinical trials for the treatment of severe cardiovascular diseases, basically using bone marrow derived multicellular therapy, which was really attractive at the time. And cell and gene therapies weren't quite as prominent as they are now, but really represented sort of the next frontier of innovation in the industry. And so I was really excited to join a company that was kind of on the leading edge of these emerging technologies. So that's what brought me to the company. At the time, Sanofi, which is one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world, bought Genzyme. And after they bought the company, they decided to divest what was essentially the Genzyme biosurgery business. So they're a pharma company. They weren't really a med tech company. So they decided to divest what was called the cell therapy and regenerative medicine business. And that's how we acquired this portfolio. So initially, it was the first generation cartilage repair product called Carticel. Epicel, which is a skin graft product that uses a patient's own cells for severe burn treatment, essentially a skin graft product. And then MACI was approved in Europe, but not in the US. And so part of our development of that product was that we ended up submitting the BLA to the FDA in the US and getting approval for MACI in December of 2016. So essentially that was a kind of a strategic transaction for us that essentially took us from a development stage company to a commercialization company. And then we changed the name of the company to Vericel. We moved our headquarters to Boston, where our manufacturing is now. And so it really was quite a transformative time for us. And as you alluded to, Dr. Grant, now we're seen as kind of a leading provider of advanced cell therapies for the sports medicine and severe burn care markets. And we have a highly differentiated portfolio of innovative advanced cell therapies and specialty biologics that essentially repair tissues and restore function. And we're really focused on changing the standard of care for patients with knee cartilage injuries.
Yeah. So I think you did a good job alluding to this. I only reason I know is to hear this little story from your rep. So basically I heard a very positive story, how you basically, this was a hurting product in 2014. And I know that some of the reps are going to kill me for telling you this, but it was a hurting product in 2014 or not doing as well. And you basically found a way to acquire this. And now you have this situation where you have a sort of, I would call the golden ticket of cartilage, where it's under this biologic option. It's been FDA approved. And for those listeners, and I want to make sure Nick can respond to this, this is not easy to do, right? There are lots of cartilage surgeries that I'm telling you about that, one, insurance companies won't cover, and two, they're not FDA approved yet. So there's some sexy stuff in Europe that we hear about all the time, but you can't use it in the US. Or there's some sexy stuff we've talked about on the show, and you can't use it that frequently because it's hard to get insurance to cover it. This is an insurance covered FDA product. So it's a big deal. And now it's one of the most popular cartilage projects and one of probably the most studied cartilage projects. So, I mean, I think that's, if you want to kind of comment on the fact how did you know this was going to be like this? And you don't have to go into big detail, but kind of that story is kind of incredible.
Yeah, I mean, it really was, because, we were kind of really focused on, focusing the predecessor company on which programs we should be, obviously kind of bringing forward in the clinic. But again, it was a pretty nascent industry at the time, and you really want to diversify your risk in a higher risk development situation. And so we were very, very fortunate to sort of, I mean, Sanofi was running a process like many large companies do, where they contact a lot of companies, and we were probably one of what were a few natural buyers of the business. We knew the cell therapy space. There weren't that many companies working there. We developed a great relationship with our business development partners in Paris at Sanofi. It's a French-based company, and kind of entered the process late, but sort of ended up winning the deal. And to your point, yeah, at the time, the whole business was doing maybe $40 million in revenue. It was kind of flat to declining. And we were able not only to kind of get the commercial business sort of growing again at sort of industry or above rates, but we also were able to get MACI approved in the US with a pretty creative regulatory strategy, where we took one pivotal study from Europe, the extension study that I'll talk about later, the Cartilage data that existed in the US, and we actually didn't have to run any additional studies. And so we were able to get to the market very quickly with the pivotal data from the phase 3 study in Europe, kind of leapfrog the competition, first to market. And, obviously that's allowed us to kind of achieve the growth that we've been able to achieve to date. So it's been like everything, it's a lot of hard work by a lot of really talented people, but it's very rewarding when you're able to take what was essentially, I'll call it a neglected business, right? Because Genzyme had bigger products that they focused investment on. And you see it a lot in the industry where companies, even my predecessor, the company Lilly that I worked at, when we would divest products, sometimes they get into other companies' hands and they grow into being multi-billion-dollar companies like Vericel's become. And it's really because you've got a focused management team that's really kind of nurturing the product, which again may just not have been as high a priority in a bigger company at the time.
Yeah. Will, put up that slide, the first one. So I think it'd be good for you to touch on, and we kind of can, I can also chime in too, because obviously I know this product pretty well. But I think for the viewers to understand sort of what we treat this articular cartilage damage you see here with the MACI. That's how it's delivered for all those listeners. But really, sort of what's unique about the MACI compared to other products out there? I mean, I've had my podcast, I've had every possible cartilage thing I've talked about. So what's the uniqueness of this MACI procedure? What do you feel is the uniqueness of it?
Yeah, so MACI is the leading product for the company. So we just released our kind of preliminary financial results for 2024, and MACI will be close to a $200 million product in 2024, growing at around 20%. So as you mentioned, it really has become the leading restorative cartilage repair product on the market. It's basically an advanced cell therapy that we'll show you more about, that uses a patient's own cells to repair the damaged cartilage tissue and restore function. And MACI is unique in that it's the first and only FDA-approved product that applies tissue engineering processes to grow a patient's own cells on a scaffold, basically, using a healthy cartilage tissue to do that. And, cartilage injuries, while everybody sort of hears more often probably about ACL tears and meniscal injuries, I mean, cartilage injuries are a significant issue, as you can expound upon, where, basically cartilage is unique in that, unlike most other tissues in your body, which, have intrinsic healing properties, that's not the case with cartilage, because there's no blood vessels to bring repair cells. There's no lymphatics to get rid of cellular and tissue debris, and no nerve. So, cartilage, a focal cartilage injury like we treat, is like a pothole on the surface of the knee. And if it's left untreated, leads obviously to joint pain and dysfunction, but ultimately to osteoarthritis and partial and full knee replacement. So, that's the progression that we're focused on halting.
Yeah, that's perfect. And I think it's good for this slide. I'll show the listeners, but basically there's 3 types of cartilage stuff. So we have the ones you clean up, which is what a lot of people used to do. It's been around for a long time. And you got the microfracture and the drilling that's a little bit more old school, but it's not really, it's just sort of trying to repair and try to fill it with something good. And then these are sort of the main products, and obviously ACI. So to viewers don't listen to not get confused, ACI and MACI, ACI is just the older version of MACI, right?
Yep.
And so now we have this better matrix. So obviously before we had to use the periosteal layer, which was, as you can put it, it was more challenging, right? So now it's a lot easier to do these procedures. I think this is kind of a good slide to bring up. So, you guys went from sort of this arthrotomy Carticel, then you join the company takes off, 2016, big jump, right? Like it just was a lot different. And so you guys describe that process briefly. Sort of, you went from now, like how did you go from this really tedious, so Will, this used to take like 3 times longer, and then they figured out a way to make it so it did. So how did you guys do that? What was your thought process in going from that to this sort of 2016, 2018 product that's now, much easier to use and much more reliable?
Yeah. So, in the US, so when we bought the business, MACI was already approved in Europe. That's where the technology was developed by Dr. Peterson in Sweden. It was approved in Europe. But Carticel was the product that, was shown on the left-hand side of that slide. That was the product that was approved in the US when we bought the product. And as you mentioned, it was a first generation ACI. So that's autologous chondrocyte implantation. So taking a patient's own cells and implanting them in the defect. First generation ACI product that was really first commercialized in the US in the 1990s. And, as we'll talk about with the MACI procedure, what ends up happening is, and you can explain it, add any color that you'd like. But, when you suspect there's a cartilage injury, often you'll go in and do what you referred to as sort of the palliative techniques, do a chondroplasty, a diagnostic arthroscopic procedure just to see what's going on in the knee. And at that point, that's where you take a biopsy of healthy cartilage for, at the time, Carticel and now MACI. So out of a tic-tac size biopsy out of a non-weight bearing portion of the knee that is sent to our manufacturing facility in Boston, where we process the biopsy. We isolate the chondrocytes, which are the cells that make cartilage, and we expand those cells, and then we cryopreserve them. So we freeze them down. We wait till surgeons like you are and the patient are ready to move forward with the surgery. Once that happens and you pick a surgery date, we kind of work backwards. We thaw the cells, we further expand them, we seed them onto that collagen membrane that's shown in the second image from the left at a density of about 500,000 to 1 million cells per square centimeter. Package it up, send it to the surgical site where the surgeon obviously kind of prepares the defect and essentially cuts the MACI membrane to the size of the defect, glues it in with fibrin glue, and is done. So in the case of Carticel, which was the predecessor product, the front end of that process was essentially the same. Take a biopsy, expand the cells, but as it's shown in that vial, the final finished product was a liquid cell suspension. Now you can imagine, and you alluded to this, how hard it is to fill a pothole on the knee with a liquid suspension, right? We liken it to trying to
torture is a small word.
Yeah, we liken it to kind of spackling, a wall, with water, right? I mean, it's very hard to do. And so what that required was opening up the whole knee. As you alluded to, taking a periosteal harvest off of the shin bone, microsuturing that into place, injecting the cells. So it was highly invasive, technically demanding, very time consuming. And so it became kind of a niche product at the kind of high-end cartilage repair specialists. And that's because, again, it's really the way, one of the only ways that you can truly repair the tissue, because you're using a patient's own cells to regrow that cartilage. Around the year 2000, a company called Vericel in Europe developed MACI, which was a next generation cartilage repair product where those cells were seeded onto the membrane, as I just described. And then Genzyme acquired Vericel in 2004. We acquired the business from Genzyme, and that's how MACI sort of made it into our hands. And as I mentioned, it wasn't approved in the US at the time. We ended up submitting the BLA in 2015. The FDA approved it late in 2016, and we launched the product in 2017. So the real sort of, as I mentioned, this was kind of a niche product, used because there's actually 20-year outcome data with Carticel now. So once you regrow this cartilage, correct me if I'm wrong, but it can really last a lifetime unless you have another injury, right? So that's why surgeons would take the time to do that. The beauty of MACI, and you see this often in the medtech industry, that when you take a highly invasive surgery, open heart surgery, and then you kind of progress to minimally invasive cardiac stents, you see that there's this broad adoption as the standard of care changes. And that's really what's going on with MACI right now. So because you have this product now that has the cells already on the membrane, as I mentioned, as you can see in the third image from the left, we actually developed custom cutters that actually would make an open MACI procedure. So it went from highly invasive to a mini arthrotomy, kind of trying to make it even simpler and less time consuming for surgeons in an open procedure by developing these custom cutters that would allow you to score the cartilage and then stamp out the membrane, exact size that you could then glue in. And really, that was a big technological advancement that made it a less invasive, faster, simpler surgery for the surgeons. And that's why our surgeon base has grown so dramatically since we launched the product.
Nick, I want to stop you a second. So first off, that's great. So I think for the listeners to hear what he's saying, they basically took a very challenging situation. They keep making it simpler. I know people always think simpler is, never good. You want complicated, but in this case, we want it simpler, right? The less time under anesthesia, the simple cutters, you want more adoption. And then the more adoption means more people get to see it. So the idea that behind this is pretty cool. And I think, Will, I don't know if you have any questions about this, but he basically just said to the listeners that we're going to take your cartilage, we're going to send it to Boston, we're going to grow it, we're going to freeze it. This sounds like a movie, right? And then we're going to send it back to you in a box, and then it's going to be sterile, and then you're going to glue it on your knee. And when I tell it to patients, they're like, what? That can actually work? I don't know if you have anything else, Will, that you want to chime in. I know you play doctor on TV, but
well, just the fact that it's the regenerating cartilage, right, and utilizing this component, and I could imagine, right, we talk about sports, on the show, the athlete now is recovering faster, long-term effects, the flexibility, right, when you think about what you're utilizing as this component. So I know if especially if I'm an athlete, but just anyone else, that I can have mobility, quality of life, in movement, utilizing this, that's all you want, especially after you've suffered a injury, to kind of go back to, this normality.
And I think what you guys are hearing from Nick too is you have this product, right? Like, so the product has been around for a long time. And then every time they make a tweak to it, right? Like, you don't want to make big tweaks with the FDA and everything else. But, they found, like, we have this really great product that works. How do we make it work better? So how do we make it work better? Open, which is with the bigger incision, that's with those cutters. And now, which we'll talk about, and I don't want to give away too much behind me, but the arthroscopic approach to do this, which again, the goal here is extremely high technology, very small incisions. And we can get to that. That's like sort of the formula, which we finally got to. Nick, very briefly, can you kind of touch on this slide and explain the dual membrane idea so people can understand? And we'll show how it regrows in a minute.
Yeah. So, as I was describing earlier, once we've expanded the patient's cells, they're seated onto this collagen membrane, and there's a dense side that is on the top and then a kind of less dense side on the bottom. The way we seed those cells is you kind of flip it over, and, chondrocytes are spindle cells. So they attach themselves to those collagen fibers. And then when it's implanted, it's the dense side up, sort of cell side down. And once the implant or the membrane is implanted at the bottom, as you show here, those spindle cells kind of migrate down to the subchondral bone. They start producing extracellular matrix, which is essentially the cartilage, and it fills that defect from the bottom up and allows patients, as Will alluded to kind of resume their normal activities, right? So our core patients, and I'd be interested in your take on this, Dr. Garcia, are really those sort of younger active patients. So, think about a bell curve from sort of late teens into early 50s. I think in the Summit pivotal study, average age was about 35. Same thing in the publication of the first 1,000 patients we treated in the US. So it really is that patient population that is suffering from significant knee pain that wants to fix the cartilage injury and get back to their sort of normal activities.
Well, and I think what's interesting, if Will can see that, you guys, I'm sure the viewers saw that, how it grows back. That's literally how it works. And if you scope patients at 3 months, 6 months, 9 months for other reasons, or they want to have, there's some issue, they're getting stiff or something, because again, we all do these surgeries, you want 100%, but the word 100% never exists. But if you go in there and you take a look, you can actually see that at certain stages, there's ways this thing looks. And when it gets up to the full stage, and I know because I do a lot of these, you can't get that cartilage off. Like Nick keeps saying, like when you have a solid regrowth, Will, it like literally, like even a knife, you cannot take it off. Like the first time I saw it, it's very hard because you have to, if you're a surgeon that had never seen one of these before, it's very hard to process because we're not used to products that do this. But when you see it, you can literally put your finger on it and it feels just like the rest of the knee. So the ability to regrow when you've been around for a long time and known that this doesn't really happen that often, that we get really good regrowth of cartilage, it's just mind boggling. I remember the first time I saw one, I was like, I called my rep and I was like, this actually works. Like it legitimately regrew. It looks just like the other stuff. And if you were to, when you core out things or do things around that area, if there's a part of it that doesn't fully regrow and you have to redo something, you can't get rid of that other stuff. It's like stuck on. It's just like the solid good stuff. So, Will, I don't know if if you have any questions about that, because that's interesting.
So obviously, with something like this, we're talking about maybe severe cartilage damage, but have you seen anything come across your operating table where it's minimal, but based on the athlete or the patient, you're kind of going in and using this technique to make sure that whatever you're working on is extra sturdy because of this product?
Well, Nick can probably jump on this too, but I basically, we don't do this as preventative, but we do prevent other things, right, Nick? I mean, the idea is that you put this cartilage hole on one side to prevent damage to the other side. Imagine this, Will, you got a tire and you got a road, right? The road has a pothole in it, you'll damage the tire, or the tire has a nail in it, you don't want to damage the road. So if you fix one side, you avoid damage to the other side. So that's the preventative nature of this. It's still an invasive surgery, and Nick, we talk about 10 months to a year recovery. You got insurance authorization, everything else. You don't want to go through this willy nilly. But these patients are, as Nick will tell you, these patients with cartilage damage are much more severely impacted than the ACL tears.
Right. Agreed. Yep.
Yeah. So I think one we can chime in is, you guys have done, if there's a couple of studies we've seen where it shows all the cartilage surgeries and it shows the number of research studies. MACI has the most research on it of any of the current cartilage products on the market, which is pretty crazy. So when people ask, like, has this been around? Do you trust the results? If you don't trust the results of this one, you shouldn't trust any of them because, there are some strong results. But I mean, I don't know if you can, it's amazing that you guys just continue to, Nick, you have so many projects out there and so much research out there. Why keep doing it? You have so much data already. So explain what's the desire for MACI to always keep doing it, keep getting better, right? Like you've already won the game. So why do you keep doing it?
Well, I do think, one of the advantages, several advantages to MACI that we talk about all the time. First of all, MACI has a very broad label that basically the indication for MACI covers, single or multiple defects anywhere in the knee, regardless of whether there's bony involvement or not. So it's applicable for a large number of patients and really has unsurpassed clinical data. So MACI is the only FDA-approved product that demonstrated superiority versus microfracture, which Dr. Garcia mentioned, which is what the FDA requires as a comparator in these phase 3 pivotal studies. So the Summit study, which is the MACI pivotal study, basically demonstrated statistically significantly greater improvements in pain and function versus microfracture at 2 years. That's the common endpoint. And then there was actually an expansion phase of the study that went out 3 additional years to 5 years. And the FDA was very interested in making sure we included that data in the label as well, which showed that the improvements that we're seeing at 2 years carried all the way out to 5 years. So that's a pretty significant sort of longitudinal data that's in our label to begin with. But because MACI was approved in Europe and Australia since kind of the early 2000s, what you're seeing now is, even last year in the American Journal of Sports Medicine, there was a publication of a prospective 10-year outcomes study, which showed, positive improvements for MACI out to 10 years. And even one other publication out to 15 years. And as I mentioned, Carticel has data out to 20 years. And so, it is really important, especially when you have kind of an innovative, premium priced kind of product that, as you mentioned, is covered by all the major insurance plans in the country, that you can continue to demonstrate that this is really kind of a restorative procedure that can last, as I mentioned.
And Nick, I don't want to interrupt you, but I want to bring that point up you just said. So you just said an expensive product, because that is a common misconception for patients, right? And I'm this is really important because I want the viewers to hear this, because I bring this up on every single talk and no one listens to me because some of these doctors are like, this is an expensive product. This is a pharmaceutical product. So it's very cool because you guys got a pharmaceutical allocation. It means you have a lot more rigors you have to go through, correct? Right? For the biological stuff. Yep. But this is a pharmaceutical. So this product is paid for by the insurance company. It's not paid for by the patient. It's not paid for by, the hospital. It's paid for by the insurance company, which we all know in the news. That's the one we're okay with them paying for it because they're doing pretty well. But the important thing, I think, is for people to understand that while all this product is expensive for the insurance company, for the patients, it's the same as anything else. And now you get this superior product. So it's really important for people to hear that, I think, because they hear, oh, this sounds so fancy. It sounds like the Mercedes-Benz or the BMW of products. Maybe I can't afford it. It has nothing to do with that. This is an insurance provided coverage.
Yeah. And, the interesting part of that, so as you had alluded to, unlike most devices in the med tech industry, MACI is actually very different. So MACI is actually regulated by the FDA as a combination product. So there's different combinations. There can be a drug device like the drug-eluting stents, et cetera. In this case, MACI is, again, regulated as a biologic device product with the collagen membrane as the device component. And then, of course, the patient's own cells as the biologic component. And that has a lot of important implications, in terms of the regulatory pathway that we had to pursue to get the product approved and on the market in the US, intellectual property protection, and as you alluded to, how the product is reimbursed compared to a typical product device. So, because MACI's a biologic, it had, for example, additional 12-year data protection, which is afforded to all biologic products in addition to the patent life. It's actually reimbursed under a J code. So it's not part of a CPT code, professional fee for the surgeon, or facility fee. There's actually a J code that's listed in the compendia like other biologic and pharmaceutical products that is reimbursed by the patient's insurance plan, as you mentioned. And I think, an important part of that, first of all, well over 90% of the submissions for approval get approved, right? And a lot of that has to do with MACI differs a little bit from a normal biologic or drug product, which are dispensed in a pharmacy, right? So every insurance plan has a pharmacy benefit that we're all familiar with, and a medical benefit, which is what MACI's covered under. So a pharmacy benefit, basically the manufacturers kind of discount to get a formulary position. And then once it's sort of on a formulary, your physician can write a script. Nobody really says, Dr. Garcia, do you really have hypertension? It's just sort of managed by where they kind of discounted on a formulary tier. In the case of a product like MACI that's reimbursed under a medical benefit, again, every major plan in the country covers it. And they basically have to approve it in advance of the surgery. So there will be pick a Blue Cross Blue Shield plan. It'll say a patient's eligible for MACI if they are this age with a grade 3 or 4 focal chondral defect, their ability, they have an ability to do the rehab, et cetera. The point being that the insurance plans know that every time MACI is being used, it's on an appropriate patient. So they know the price, they know the clinical benefit, they know, the patients are going to benefit from that. And that's why you get the prior approval. So I think one of the things that the company has done over the last decade is really sort of unlock a lot of value, because we try to carry a lot of that load for the surgeons in terms of the benefit coordination between a patient, surgeon, the insurance plan, to make sure that the submission is done in a timely fashion, doesn't sort of slow things down for when the patient and surgeon want to, have the surgery. And we invest a lot in that to make sure that, again, it makes it as streamlined as it possibly can be. But that, that is an important point that you brought up, that, when an insurance company is able to know that they approve every patient before the product's used and they know the benefit, that sort of, erases the whole sort of, kind of, I won't call it a phantom objection, but discussions around the price.
Well, we've seen it. We've seen it, right, Nick, on the internet. You see all these papers where there's someone posted, like, look at my rejection for my surgery that I need. Look at the rejection for my surgery that I need. You don't get it with this. And I think, Will, we should, for the listeners, we just keep hearing this, right? This is a innovative product. And I told you that, this is obviously, it's a pharmaceutical, it's expensive for the insurance company. But the insurance company would never approve it if it didn't work so well. That's the point we're trying to make. You have a company that you hear about, all these insurance companies, and how they're very stringent about costs, right? So if this has to be a product that has such a good quality of life improvement that they're willing to pay for it. And so that shows you the value of this, because it's approved with pretty much any insurance. Like, people come in, they're like, oh, sure, my insurance will cover it. I'm like, I'm pretty sure that it will. So it's very rare that it's difficult to get approved. So, Will, that's interesting, right? Like, you have something, it's like basically like you have insurance companies that we hear all these things online. We're not going to have a whole talk about that right now. But you hear all this stuff online about these insurance companies, and that they're very stringent about costs. And now you have a product that they're willing to do reimbursement for, despite the cost, because of the quality of life. Because quality of life is a really big deal, right? You get your ACL tear and you don't get it fixed. Sometimes you can get away with it and you can run around with it and you can do things. When you have a cartilage hole, Will, it really, really hurts. It's up there to like knee arthritis, because actually it's pre-arthritis. And so that's something that's really important for the listeners to hear. They think cartilage hole, that's not a big deal, but they hurt way more than anything else. These are my most satisfied patients, my cartilage patients. Yeah.
And I would say there are publications out there that show, even though MACI is, may cost more up front, over the life of the patient or long term, it actually is equal or less than some other options that could have been done by the time you add in what will ultimately have to be done. And just to kind of reinforce that innovation point, when you think about the cost of MACI, compared to gene therapies that can be in the $1 million to $2 million range, or CAR T cell therapies, which are $500,000 per patient. I mean, that's the kind of innovative manufacturing and other development, processes that you have to go through. But again, it's nowhere near that kind of price point.
Yeah.
Right?
Hey, Nick.
Well, and it's important what you said. 1 second. Important what you said is like that when you do lesser surgeries, Will, and these cartilage stuff, people fail and like they come back. And we're talking about my average cartilage surgery patient, or sometimes I get to them 6 surgeries, 5 surgeries. What if I could do it in 1 surgery and avoided 5 more? And so you imagine that what he's saying is like, Maybe each individual surgery is less expensive than the MACI, but it's going to prevent long-term. And I've seen what you're talking about. So sorry, Will, I just want to bring that point up.
No, it's fine. It's right on line, kind of what you guys are talking about. I just wanted to ask Nick if he's gotten feedback from a patient, a doctor, something that really resonated with you, saying, "Man, your product either saved me money or saved me from going back and having multiple surgeries, changed my life." What's the story that you went home and you told your significant other and say, "Man, this was a good, this is why we do it." What's that one?
Yeah.
What's that one that sticks with you?
Well, we have all sorts of MACI patient videos of kind of what it means to a young mother who couldn't walk up and down the stairs with her baby, and how it changed her life to be able to do those things. And that is exactly why we're doing this. And it's interesting. This is a good time of year. We typically, and we'll do it again this year, we'll be at the Super Bowl for Radio Row, and we go on a lot of the sports medicine or the sports channels. And one of the folks who would do it with me in the early days was Dara Torres, who was an Olympic athlete. And she actually had Cartilage in her left knee, and she was one of the first MACI patients in her right knee. And she was actually able to go back and compete in the Olympics after she had her first, surgery done with Cartilage. So, those are the kind of life-changing outcomes that, she was one who said, would talk to me about how hard it was for her to even walk up the stairs, let alone sort of train for the Olympics. Right. And so that's kind of you could probably say that about almost every patient we treat. They couldn't do the normal things that all of us do, or whatever athletic activities. And MACI allows them to do that, which is obviously extremely rewarding.
Perfect.
Yeah. Well, I think that what he touched on is perfect. I think I don't want to pivot, but obviously we still have a little bit of time with him. So I promised him that we would say under an hour. He didn't know if we could make it to an hour. I think we're going to go over. So that's why we're going to have to end up cutting it down. But Will, turn off that slide for a second. I want to bring up this point. I want to ask him. So I think we've talked a lot about, you did some awesome job talking about the business behind MACI, which I think is super unique. I don't ever get to hear that perspective. We don't ever hear that because we're mostly focused on the medical side of things. But for the listeners, we like to start from the ground up, like with Napkin to Reality, which is one of our first shows. Like, how do you take something small and make it something big? And we have the man here that did it, which is awesome. But Nick, there's obviously the post part, which is, or the stuff is like, you have this awesome product, right? You keep making modifications to it. You keep making it better. But there's something unique about you guys that I wanted you to talk about. So when it comes to like informing people, you have different ways of doing it, right? You guys have, and you have Carla and other people in your office that do an amazing job. But you do local labs so that people locally can find out. You have people like me that fly around the country to talk about your product. You have different directors that talk about your product. But you guys do so many things. And there's some, Will, you've seen me do this. The headset thing I did on Friday, that was MACI. So like they're so into like every possible way we can show people how to do this surgery. And they're dedicated, right? Like I just got on a phone call this morning. I was talking with the entire team on why I did the certain steps. And they're just so into like, how do we get better? But it's, where does that come from? Because I worked at a lot of companies, some do some things, but they don't go to the extent that you guys do, which is like, I want to find every possible way to teach someone about this. And it doesn't mean sell it. Don't go sell the product hard. Just tell us how you do it and how we can make it better.
Yeah, I think it comes back to, we have a unique sort of place in the industry. And it's certainly the case with MACI, where we get a patient's cells. We know every patient that we're treating, right? We're not stamping out a million, again, hypertension pills and they're going to whoever they go to. I mean, it's a very patient-centric and customer-focused group. And that's true for MACI. It's really true for the catastrophic burn patients that we treat, with Epicel and Nexibrid, our other products. So that kind of culture of we're focused on the patients. We want to make sure surgeons really understand how to identify appropriate patients, make sure we have good clinical outcomes. That just kind of is built into the DNA of our company. And you're right. We invest very heavily in surgeon peer-to-peer educational programs. including these bioskills labs on, with cadaver knees and things like that. And in fact, it's really the largest discretionary commercial budget item that we spend money on, right? Because, when we do these programs and we fly surgeons in from around the country to train over the weekends, et cetera, I mean, it is a big investment, but, again, it's all geared towards, we want to make sure, first of all, we're just so fortunate that we have surgeons like you and dozens of these passionate, dedicated surgeons that we partner with to make sure we're bringing quality educational programs to surgeons who are interested in sort of adding MACI to their practices and treatment algorithms. And, it's definitely the most important thing we do, again, to make sure we optimize patient selections, outcomes, and so on. So, it's really just that. It's just sort of built into sort of how we operate and what we do. We as we have an advisory board, we have speaker bureaus that we partner closely with. We want to know from the surgeons sort of how can we best teach other surgeons, right? So whether it's educational content or new technologies that we can leverage to make sure it's easier to consume by the surgeon customers. I mean, we're just always interested in that feedback. And I think, as we were developing the MACI Arthro instruments, that was an iterative process where we would develop prototypes. We'd have surgeons come in and work with them, make tweaks, develop, come back with another one. You go through that 4 or 5 times. And again, it's just about getting that input to make sure we're kind of delivering the right innovation and technology for the surgeons, in addition to the educational component.
All right. So I see the timer clicking down, and I need to get to this last topic because no one has any idea what the thing is behind me. And we've been here for 46 minutes and 53 seconds. So let's go to the next. Nick, I appreciate everything you said. This is awesome. So, Will, I'll say you keep hearing all this stuff. We got the sexy cartilage surgery. We can grow it in the lab. We can glue it on your knee. But until a year ago, other than some kind of offshoot random stuff that people were doing, there was no way to do it through an incision this small. All right. It's always been incision this small, long as my hand, big incisions, open. I said, every time I told patients, I was like, I'm just giving you an open incision. The first step is a scope. That's easy. Second step's open. You'll get through it. Not a big deal, but it's open. It's big. And there was a lot of work that went into this. And I was involved in this FDA trial, and it's different than other companies, right? You can't just start to tweak the product a little bit and get it. Because it's a biologic, Nick, and we don't have to go too much into it so we can show the product. We don't know if you can pull it up. You have to do a lot more thing. We had to do the FDA trials to show that it was not damaging the cells. And normally you wouldn't have to do that, but only because your product, because it was so stringent because of the FDA, that you had to basically show this product would be just as good as the open one, even though it, like, all of us kind of knew that. But you had to do it for the FDA, and you had to do so many extra hoops that the average company doesn't have to do. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is. When you develop kind of an instrument set like this for the arthroscopic delivery, there's multiple work streams, right? This took us 2 or 3 years to kind of develop. There's the instrument development itself. And, obviously that involves, as I mentioned, sort of the design phase of it, where you develop, you work with a vendor. We have a local vendor that is they did our custom cutters or they've done other work for us, the instrument kits for open, et cetera. We work with them, we develop prototypes, we have surgeons come in, we refine it. You get a year, that probably took almost a year till you finally even get to design phase. Then once the instruments are done, you go through a whole sort of set of validation, testing, et cetera, to make sure that they meet FDA requirements to make the instruments commercially available. Now, at the end of the day, as you alluded to, I mean, these are class 1 devices that we actually registered before MACI Arthro was approved. But that was just the device component. The trick here was that, because MACI's approved under a biologics license application, to be able to add the arthroscopic administration to the product label, we actually had to do what you were referring to, which is a human factor study that says, if we give surgeons this set of instructions, can they reproducibly basically administer the implant using these arthroscopic instruments. And so to get it on the label so that we could promote the instruments and then teach surgeons how to use them appropriately, we had to go through that. Was essentially a 10-month FDA review process, which, you know, we obviously were able to do successfully, which was just great.
I think Will wants to hear this. I can say it now, the trial's been approved, but Will, you get a phone call, you got to fly out to Boston, and then they don't tell you how to use it, and they want to see how you do it without that in a black box. And then you're on a video camera, and then they say, here's 4 different ways to do it. Let's see if you can do this without any instruction. And if you can do it without any instruction, then we know it's safe. And that's what they did for what, 16 or something? They're maybe more than that, surgeons. But basically, that was the game. It was like almost a game, but it wasn't really a game, because if you don't do it right, then you're out, or the FDA trial doesn't
It's
work.
your own version of Squid Games. I got it.
But Will, you know me long enough that we love the game. It was a fun game, but you're under scrutiny for it. But you can see, guys, I mean, think people this is like, they found surgeons they thought would do a reasonable job. They flew them all out there to do this, just to show that this product was safe to put in the scope. So when people ask me, what do you think about this new thing? I'm like, this has been tested more than anything I know of, right? You guys have gone through so many hoops, but now you have this product that basically we've done 5 of them now, and first one in the Pacific Northwest. And we have this product where we can now insert this product that's 20 years tested through a scope, through an incision this small. I mean, what is your feedback been so far? I mean, I could go on and on about this part. We've seen way too many of my posts. But Nick, I want to hear from you. What has your feedback been on the company in the first 6 months of this new product? Because it's been out since it got approved at the end of August. Is that correct?
Yeah, and kind of launched sort of at the end of the 3rd quarter. And, you know, the physician feedback, surgeon feedback has been great. You know, I think in the market research we did before launch, you know, whether surgeons were MACI users at the time or not, you know, there was a high interest level. You know, surgeons said I would expect to do more procedures, or even if I wasn't a user, I'd shift some of my procedures if a MACI arthro option was available. And, you know, so we have seen that out of all of our surgeon segments. So we have, you know, folks like you who are, you know, strong users of the product now doing MACI arthro cases. We had sort of our original set of surgeons that maybe hadn't adopted it yet. They're starting to use it. And then we had another set of new surgeons that really just do arthroscopics, you know, procedures, and that had never even used MACI. And we've seen sort of cases scheduled or completed out of all of those segments. So that's great from a surgeon perspective. And then from kind of a patient perspective, as you know, MACI Open is kind of a go-to product if you have a deep defect on the back of the kneecap or the patella. If you have a larger defect, 4 square centimeters or above, that's kind of like the go-to for MACI. But we've seen since we launched MACI Arthro that not only are you seeing these procedures, you know, the whole thing was designed to treat 2 to 4 square centimeter defects on the femoral condyle, which is the largest part of, you know, the MACI addressable market, because you can explain this better than I, but, you know, the end of the thigh bone, you know, bears a lot of the weight, and that's where you get a lot of the injuries. And there's just more smaller than larger. So that's what we were designing the instruments for. But we have seen now that those instruments are being used in the trochlea behind the patella. We actually had a patella case where people can lift it up into the patella without having to flip over.
That's not easy to do, Will. I haven't tried it. It doesn't look easy. It's not easy to do, but that's impressive. Sorry, keep going.
Yeah, so that's the feedback. So just kind of on surgeon use from MACI users and non-users, using it in different locations of the knee, not just the femoral condyle. And then I think what we've seen anecdotally, and you can share this better than I can, but you've seen what the reason the surgeons were interested in it based on our market research was less invasive surgery, less postoperative pain, faster postoperative recovery, better aesthetics. And so you see these things on social media where, you know, they're talking about range of motion being, you know, significantly better than you would see from an open procedure and so on. So I think, you know, that's something to your point earlier, we have, you know, different, you know, we have a registry going on now so that we can look at those early post surgical outcomes. And I think, because we didn't do a clinical study, you couldn't measure them prior to approval. So that's something we have to do post-approval. And, hopefully, that kind of bears out that you're seeing all those benefits that you would expect from less invasive procedure.
I think that you might have been one of my LinkedIn posts then. So yeah, that's but Will, I think people, you can't slow them down now. They get this surgery now, and before that was a lot slower, and now you can't slow them down. I've had, out of the 5 I've done, I've had 3 where I've had to tell them to stop moving so fast. So that's a good thing when you're slowing the patients down that much, Will. So anyhow, I think, Nick, we don't want to cut you off too soon, but I want to make sure you have a few minutes. If you got about 2 minutes, can you talk about what you think the future is for this?
Yeah, well, for MACI generally, we think, because again, as I mentioned, we're 8 years into the MACI launch, right? And you're still seeing this product grow 20% a year as we're adding more surgeons. We look at how many biopsies or surgeries are done per surgeon as surgeons kind of identify more patients within their practice. So, we think the core MACI, will continue to grow. We think with MACI Arthro on top of that, there's an opportunity, for better patient outcomes and more surgeries. And then, MACI and other joints. So we expect to, there's cartilage on the end of all the bones in your body, articular cartilage. And, the next biggest opportunity is in the ankle. And so we've been working with the FDA on kind of developing the plan for us to launch a MACI ankle study, which we expect to do in the second half of this year. So file an IND in the first half of the year, and then initiate the study in the back half of the year. And we think that will be, we already know, we can't promote it because it's not an approved use, but there's certainly publications out there of surgeons that have treated ankle cartilage injuries with MACI. It's been used in the hip, the shoulder. Again, we can't promote that. And, in some of those other joints, having an arthroscopic option will be important.
100%, especially the ankle. But that's you're getting to the perfect topic. I think that for the viewers, this is a knee surgery product, off-label uses the other areas, but coming down the line, and you heard it from the man himself.
So that's the plan. And now that we've built our new manufacturing facility, which you need to come up and see in Burlington, which has its own training lab. So I think you'll enjoy doing that. But that also has been, this facility has been built for to meet global manufacturing requirements. So we're doing right now an assessment of sort of OUS opportunities in Europe, Latin America, and certain countries in Asia. So that's an exciting opportunity for us as well.
That's awesome. Well, Nick, thank you so much for being on. I don't want to cut you off, but you know how the social media doesn't like it if we go over an hour. But I think I told you so, Nick. We went to an hour.
One quick question.
Will.
Hey, you said you're going down to Radio Row, getting ready for the Super Bowl down in New Orleans. What are you going to eat? Jambalaya, beignets. What is the game plan? We don't care about anything else. What's the food that you're going to consume? Because going down to New Orleans, it is absolutely delicious down there.
Will, I told you I grew up in upstate New York. When the Bills got bounced,
they're forcing you to go down there?
We're going to let the team take this one. I've been to a number of them. So other members of our team and other surgeons actually we actually have a great guy, a former NFL, Solomon Wilcots, who was a CBS announcer and
I know
a member of the Bengals. He kind of does it with us. And so there'll be other surgeons from around the country that do that as well. So I will be sitting this one out, unfortunately.
Yeah, it makes sense. I've got a lot of friends. I'm originally from New York. I got a lot of friends back in New York that are all I said was, I'm sorry. And I left it as that. And we're going to move on because I don't want to end this on a bad note. And I want Nick to be upset with me. Dr. Garcia made me ask that question. I'll just say that.
That's true. Blame me.
Thank you so much for being a part of
Doc
Talk. We appreciate your time. This was fantastic, and I hope everyone got some great information out of this. Thank you.
Really appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Take care.
Have a good night.
Bye.
You too.